Hello and welcome to Talking Your Walk, a series of conversations that I'm having with people who have changed their lives. For whatever reason, they've changed their life, and during that process of change, they've actually helping other people change their lives as well. My name's June Meagher, and today I've got the great pleasure of talking with Ben Calder. Now, Ben's so well known in the Shropshire, Cheshire, North Wales area, and he's the managing director of the Centre for Integral Health in Shrewsbury. He's also the founder and creator of LifeForce partnering, but he will describe more of that better than I can when we have a chat with him. So anyway, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see you. And, you know, these little informal chats that I'm having with people that I admire and respect, and, you know, what can I ask you, what kind of child were you, you know?
I mean that's the hygiene, and great to be here. Thank you for inviting me in for a chat. And you know, I was an odd little child. We were a forces family. So my father and then subsequently my stepfather were both in the RAF. So we moved around a lot to start with. So for the first kind of 7 or 8 years of my life, I was moving every couple of years, which meant that I didn't really have a lot of what felt like grounding or security. There was, you know, kind of separation of my mother and my father when I was quite young, and I had a very interesting childhood. I had 2 older brothers, Calder, who you know, the founder of LifeForce, one of the big systems that I work with, and also our older brother Tim as well, who's a Himalayan mountain guide. Now they're 6 and 8 years older than me, so I didn't really spend a lot of time interacting with them so much when I was younger. And as far as I remember, I was just a bit of a quirky, odd kid that never really felt like he fitted in all that much because of that kind of constant change and turnaround. And until we kind of moved down to Cornwall when I was 7, and I did most of my childhood growing up down there. So atypical surfer, you know, kind of long blonde hair, and spending a lot of time hanging out on the beach, and I enjoyed nature a lot. You know, I was always really into nature. So even from a very kind of a relatively early independent age, kind of 11, 12 years old, I can remember really enjoying just being outside in nature. You know, Mum had us out in nature walking a lot because it was free. So it was an easy thing to do when you were a limited income family, you know, back in the kind of the 80s and so on. And it was good for me being by the sea, and Mum gave me a lot of freedom. So I could go off to the beach for the day. I would wander the cliffs. I would, you know, be out with people, and the small group of friends that I had, we would, you know, spend time on the beach and stuff. So that kind of characterized probably about the first 19 years of my life. Odd, quirky kid. I was a bit of a clown at school as well. Academically, I struggled. You know, these days I would have been identified as dyslexic, and possibly ADHD, ADD, depending on how all the assessments go, but certainly had a lot of trouble with written work. And but I was a great talker, as you know. I can talk for England, and you know, I used to get these continual school reports that would be, Ben is really good at talking about this, it would only be better if he could write it. And yeah, they never really picked up on the learning difficulty that I had there. So I kind of clowned my way through school. I spent a lot of time standing outside of classrooms for bad behavior, but you know, I got something out of making people laugh and having fun, and you know, lightening heavy situations, and I didn't really realize how much that might have kind of impacted on life going forward, and where I would be going as life went on. But it was a fun childhood, that's for sure.
Yeah, because you say Cornwall, it was UK you were in, that's wasn't right, it? Yeah, and that's a fabulous part of the world.
It was. I mean, it's an odd place to grow up. I have to tell you, it's that, you know, the coast and the areas around there are beautiful, but to be a teenage boy growing up in that environment, you might as well have brought me up in kind of 90s Ibiza, because it was a party capital, and there was lots of strange and unusual things that went on there, you know, atypical of a party seaside town. And so, you know, it had quite a big impact on me. And yet when I finished my A levels and was ready to go to university, I couldn't wait to get out of there, because I could really feel the limitation of the town, of the region, and of the people, for me to be able to become something other than somebody involved in the tourist trade, and that really wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah, they're restrictive, aren't they, when you go into small communities, rural communities, regardless of whereabouts they are in the UK. So then where did you head for your left? Where did you go to study?
Yeah, so I went to university in Cheltenham. So it's was Cheltenham and Gloucester College of Higher Education at the time, is now Gloucestershire University, and I did a 4-year honours degree in education. So I did 2 years of pure BA, BSc English literature and biology, and then my final 2 years were just pure education that was aimed at primary school at the time. And again, a further crazy 4 years. I have no idea really how I passed my degree. And when I got to the end of it and they qualified me and told me that I could teach, I wiped my brow and used an expletive and said, "There's no way I'm doing that again." You know, because it was a challenging experience, and wasn't, again, academically, you know, was very, very challenging. There were 170 people on my course to begin with. Only 70 of us graduated, and out of that 170, there were only 10 guys, and we all got in there on much lower grades than every other female did, because they needed men within the teaching community far, far more than they needed women. So we got in on an easier kind of route. But that had the consequence of meaning that actually by the time I finished 4 years later, there was no way that I was in a position to try and teach 11 subjects to, you know, 7 to 11-year-olds. No way. And I always felt a little bit sad that although I was going to have this, what would have been classed as an NQT, a mentoring year, I just didn't feel like I was fit to teach, and that was both mentally and energetically. Personally, you know, I felt it was a really bad idea. So at that time, I'd spent my last year of university working in an outdoor shop, selling like climbing gear and snowboarding gear and all that kind of stuff, and hiking, because I you know, continued this love for the outdoors all the way through my teens. You know, I spent a lot of time in places like the Lake District, Peak District, Dartmoor, North Wales, and just wanted to continue doing outdoor stuff. So once I finished university, I spent a little while longer just hanging around in Cheltenham, trying to work out what I was going to do with myself, and eventually moved down to Weymouth to start working at an outdoor activity centre. And I spent a little bit of time there working with a local youth group as well, doing volunteer work. But essentially I became a climbing and high ropes and abseiling instructor, because that was what I kind of was really good at, which was really good fun. And I was lucky enough at the time as well that the youth group that I was volunteering with in Weymouth, the guy who managed it was really big into NLP and was amazing. I mean, even the day I went in there and said, "Hey, I'd really like to come and volunteer and give something back and do something here. How can I help you?" And he said, "I don't know. How can you help me? What would you like to do here? How would you like to change lives?" And that was my first introduction to NLP, which even now sends a little bit of a tingle up my spine. And he was so good at his NLP that he actually convinced Dorchester County Council to pay for 20 of us to do it was nearly 9 months residential. So we would go away for a weekend a month and do full immersive NLP practitioner program with a fabulous guy called Reg Connolly, who trained with Bandler himself. And so we got a really, really deep NLP program that all got paid for by Dorchester County Council. And so I would use that on all the high ropes and the climbing stuff. So when I had students and teachers who were kind of like 40 foot up in the air and, you know, starting to cry and struggling with what they were doing, I could literally talk them out of it and get them to go on and achieve things that, you know, sometimes people wouldn't even think they could get off the ground, and we'd have them swinging on trapezes 40, 50 foot in the air and, you know, doing all sorts of stuff. And a lot of that was just done with clever NLP. So in a way that started to become the first part of my leanings into the kind of holistic side.
So that was the first time you'd ever encountered anything on the sort of complementary side of life, or?
I mean, no. I mean, again, you know, you've met my mum, and
Yeah.
when I was 15, she started taking me to sort of intuitive development classes because a friend of hers down in Newquay was teaching that. And so I used to go along. I mean, the kind of the funny end of the reason why of that is because in our school at that time, our secondary school, we'd had a Christian youth group who, for all that they were, used to wind the hell out of me. No pun intended there, but they used to wander around with their guitars and their self-righteous Christian songs, and I hated it. I couldn't cope with it at all. So me and my friends, we got into paganism and Wicca just to wind them up. And it got to a point where yeah, it was great. We just did, but it was nice for us as well, because we used to go out and hang out in these glades in the woods and in these nice places, and kind of imagine we were connecting into the spirit of the earth. So, you know, as a kind of a young teenager, there was something really interesting about that. But there was a situation that occurred into the school where somebody accused us of cursing their little brother and causing problems with them. And our school deputy head was a lay minister and took it very seriously, had us all in his office, phoned all our parents. And, you know, when I went home, Mum was there with Si, and they just laughed at me. They just thought it was hilarious that this teacher had bothered to do this. And then not long after that, Carolyn Bowyer, who was the intuitive development teacher who we started going to, she started to run these big exhibitions down in Cornwall that became the Cornwall New Age. And for a good 17, 18 years, it was like a long weekend festival, you know, very, very similar to the stuff that you do. So kind of the talks, the workshops, the treatments, all of that kind of stuff going on in this big hotel in Perranporth in Cornwall. And it was an amazing thing. And we used to go and help Carolyn do the setup for the events. So, you know, tables, chairs, all that kind of stuff, helping stall holders find their stalls. And then during the event itself, we would be like on the door doing tickets, and the workshop rooms that they were doing then. And this is kind of early 90s now. It was, we would take the tickets for the rooms as people were going in, but then we had to stay for the first 20, 25 minutes to make sure that nobody came in late, because there were meditations, there were transfigurations, there were all sorts of things taking place. And, you know, they didn't want the rooms disturbed once things had started. And I always had the choice of sitting in the room with my chair against the door so it couldn't open, or I could sit outside the room and just stop people from coming in. So I always used to sit inside the rooms. And so for years, we used to go to this event and help out. And so I got introduced to a lot of people very, very early on, some very kind of interesting, influential people in the UK holistic scene. And then when I went off to university, it all kind of dropped out a little bit, because obviously you do the university thing, and, you know, it was a long way from home at that point. So although I'd had interest in some of the holistic and complementary and spiritual stuff, you know, I started doing Qigong when I was 15, you know, kind of in an on and off way. By the time I finished university, I was doing yoga. I'd kind of become vegetarian. So there was stuff still going on in the background, but it was it was kind of more in the background. It wasn't the mainstream. And the NLP became the first kind of mainstream focus thing that I was doing. And after a while of being in the outdoor activity centre, I kind of wanted something that was a little bit deeper. And that's when I moved up to Shropshire in August 2000. So I'm literally about to come up on my 20-year anniversary being here. And I was taking a job then working with children with extreme behaviour through abuse and neglect. So they were kind of again 11 to 16-year-olds, and really, really challenging. But unfortunately, the job was not what it was advertised to be, and I ended up basically becoming a policer and a restrainer of young teenagers who had extreme difficulties. And as much as I could apply the NLP as well as I could, the job was just, you know, something that actually used to make me feel sick as I was going up the drive to it. And Rob Chapman, who you and I both know well, he and I used to work in that job together. So that's when I first met Rob. And so, you know, I can remember many hours of looking after naughty kids, watching Rob practice his magic and talking about his druidic studies and stuff. So, you know, it was an interesting kind of time. And I moved on to working then with children with autism, Down syndrome, again, still extreme behavior. And again, you know, kind of my interest then in, especially in diet and health, was starting to develop. And I happened to go home to Cornwall to see Mum at the same time that one of these big exhibitions was on. And it was at that point that I kind of really started to get into kinesiology. The year before, I'd heard a talk by Sue Lilly, who is based in Powys, and her partner Simon are amazing teachers of many, many things, and have had a big influence on my life. And she did a talk in '99 on hacking your body's computer, which was my first introduction to kinesiology. And then in 2000, when I was working at this job, myself and my then partner started to get ill because of the stress of the job, and we also were living in a flat that was under a pylon, and you know, just didn't know about all sorts of weird stuff like that. And that's when I started seeing a kinesiologist and getting help with, at the time, I you know, had really bad allergic rhinitis and psoriasis, and just really not healthy at all, really bad sugar addiction. So I started seeing a kinesiologist. They started making a massive difference into my health, you know, and I started changing jobs, starting to look for things that would suit me more. And while I was working with the children with autism, Down syndrome, and having the kinesiology, I was just aware of the fact that I spent a lot of time wearing clothes that were good enough to lie in the mud in, because I spent a lot of time having to restrain children who their behavior was so dangerous that I spent a lot of time lying on the ground. And it was horrible, you know, it was very, very difficult. And I was becoming much more aware of various things at the time, and we were trying to encourage the place where I was working to make improvements into the diet, which was all a lot of white flour, white sugar, a lot of dairy, and we knew that this was causing problems for the guts of these children. And you know, if we started to change things, maybe we could help them. But it didn't go down. They didn't want it, so they had their way. And so I left that and was training then as a kinesiologist, because I thought, well, this is so much easier than what I was doing, and this looks more fun, and I resonated with it more. So then I started my training in kinesiology, and was literally kind of had this part-time job working for an actual skincare company, and at weekends I would go out to all these kind of craft shows and events all around the country, selling kind of hand creams and body lotions and all this kind of stuff. And then during the week I was just studying and practicing all my kinesiology. And you know, I worked incredibly hard, so that in kind of February 2003 I qualified and kind of passed with flying colours. And by the summer, just late summer that year, I had 3 days full-time practice, because I was just going out and talking to everybody. I think that's probably the year that you and I met. And you know, I think one of your earliest exhibitions up in Oswestry or something like that. But you know, and that's where that really kind of took off and went then.
Yeah, because you worked at Joy's place, didn't you? You and Joy had the place in the Pride Hill in Shrewsbury.
Right, health comes first, yeah.
Yeah, health comes first, that's right. And then you went into Women in Mind.
That's right, yeah. So with Carmen and Laura, who again, glad to see they're still on the scene and doing all the kind of health promotion work. Yeah, so I was in Health Comes First for 5 years, then in Women in Mind, which then became Serenity for a further 5 years. And then in 2013, I opened the Centre for Integral Health, which, although we're closed at the moment, we're still there. You know, the whole Corona thing, where we've been closed since the 23rd of March, but you know, we're still there. We're still doing online stuff at the moment, and online classes and so on. But
yeah, you've created an online studio now, haven't you? You've got that off the ground, and I have caught up with some of your LifeForce Qigong workshops that you've been doing, little classes that you've been doing as well. So you know, with kinesiology and the bone technique that you do as well, don't you? You do the bone technique, you do so the LifeForce Qigong, but you've got LifeForce patterning. So what's that about?
So the kind of the prefix of LifeForce is there to look at our energy within our body, the elan vital, the vital life force that is that animation within us. We can't take all the component parts of a human being and chuck them in a vat and turn out a human being yet. There's something about us that is this life force. And when Sai started with LifeForce Qigong, we talked a lot then about an integrated business model and an integrated model of health that had different aspects to it. So at the time, with the kinesiology, the way I looked at the world was to do with patterns. And it was very much informed by the integral theory of Ken Wilber and looking at these very, very varied aspects of our lives that he distilled down into what he called the quadrants. And we never get through a moment of our life without all four of the quadrants being present. Our mind, our body and its behavior, our culture and our relationships, which inform our mind, and our physical environment, which has an effect on all of it. I mean, if you and I were living in the Bahamas, or we were living in the jungles of South America, or we were living in the Arctic tundra, it would totally change the culture we lived in, which would affect our minds, which would change our body and our behaviors. So there's all these kind of patterns that are interlocking and interweaving. And, we look at, from an integral theory point of view, we talk about something called holons, which are whole parts. And an easy way of understanding that is that whole letters make whole words, make whole sentences, make whole paragraphs, make whole chapters, make whole books. And so each one is whole and complete within itself, but is then also partial to a greater whole. So, and they're all what we class as nested. So they all sit within each other in various ways and interact with each other in various ways. And that just for me was a much more complete model of looking at holism as in a holistic sense than the previous kind of models, which, again, when we look at it from an integral point of view, we look at that kind of era or that developmental stage as something called postmodernistic pluralism. And within that, there's this sense of, we're much more concerned with the environment and with equal rights for people and within health and well-being. But it has a way of having some performance contradictions in it. So one of the things that we see in there is that, there's a dislike of hierarchies. And the idea is that any hierarchy is going to be what we would class as a dominator hierarchy, something that's not natural, but there are natural growth hierarchies, like the words to letters to sentences, or molecules to atoms to cells to organisms. They're all natural nested growth hierarchies. And so you saw this thing within pluralism where, there was this denial of hierarchies. And so that was better than a hierarchy, which automatically made no hierarchy better than a hierarchy, which is another hierarchy. So you end up with all these crazy performance contradictions that sit in there. And there were certain things that I couldn't reconcile. And so using the integral theory, then taking him on board Simon's LifeForce Qigong model as well, which is very much an integrally informed model as well. And then sort of thinking about, well, this is all just patterns, and it's working out the pattern of somebody's life. What is it that they're doing or not doing that is contributing to the problem? What are they unwilling to be and do, that if we can change that, we'll change all the other aspects. Because we have this concept within holistics that body and mind are interrelated and one will change the other. So, if I change my mindset, I can improve my body. And at a certain level, that works really well. But we don't often acknowledge how the fact that, let's say, for instance, if I have an impact injury from falling over or an accident or something like that, that can also change my mind. So the path is bidirectional, but it then also exists in all those four quadrants. If I change my environment, it can change my body and my mind. If I change my culture or my relationships, that can change my body and my mind. So there's deeper aspects that weren't being kind of overtly acknowledged within the holistic model that I was using at the time that needed evolving.
You there? Hi, sorry about that, Ben. We had a little glip with the technology here at my end. Sorry. As you were saying.
Yeah, sure. So having a deeper model for me was really necessary. I mean, you mentioned earlier about I do kinesiology, I do Bowen technique, but actually, if you go through the list of stuff that I have done qualification in, qualified in aromatherapy, in flower remedies, in McLaughlin's scar tissue release, in geopathic stress work. I've done work on voice dialogues, on transpersonal integral psychology, on so many different areas. And I needed a way to be able to organize that in my head better so that I could use it more effectively as a kinesiologist. Because kinesiology has still tended to be my overriding governing system, in that I can use it for assessing which approaches are best suited to resolving difficulties for an individual when I work with them. And so having the kind of the change in who I was then, and at the time as well, I kind of for various reasons I stopped being connected to Health Kinesiology UK and the Kinesiology Federation, differences in the way that we looked at the world that weren't going to get reconciled. So and full well that the politic in some of the organizations, for actually what you gain from being in the organization sometimes isn't worth the hassle. And at that time as well, I was teaching health kinesiology at the time. I'd become the the joint deputy head of UK training. And, and at that point, the politics starts to then be far more than the practice, and it just didn't work. And so I needed to shift. And so all of that energy of the integral model from Ken Wilber, from Simon's influence, size influence with the LifeForce Qigong work and his support, it just shifted how I worked and how I looked at things, and kind of moved in from there. And that's also really where all the shadow work started coming in as well, because it was the first time I'd really overtly been given shadow work to look at, and the difference that made for my life was just phenomenal as well. So I just had to keep on evolving that as I went along.
So explain a wee bit more about the shadow work, because I know that you do a lot of courses in that, and I've seen that pop up on your website and on your Facebook page. So explain a little bit about what that's about.
I mean, probably the easiest way to think about it, and it's the thing that most people would have commonly come across perhaps, is the idea that if there's something about somebody else that really sticks in your craw, then that's probably something about you that you need to look into. So that's the most obvious aspect of shadow work. But most people will go, oh, right, okay, yeah, that person gets on my nerves, so there's probably something about me. And they don't really go into it, and they don't really understand the why or the how or the what to really do about it. And shadow work is really understanding how we've dissociated from certain parts of ourselves to the point where we don't believe that they exist. But what happens is that because they do exist, we've just created a false fracture in our mind, is that we continue to play them out. And not only do we unconsciously continue to play them out, so we're doing behaviors that we can't acknowledge that we do, but they're still causing a problem for other people potentially, because there are positive sides to shadow as well. But we see it in the environment around us, and it's always much bigger around us. So if I'm not acknowledging, for instance, that I'm selfish, then people who are being selfish are really going to get on my nerves. God, he's so selfish. I'm not like that. I wouldn't do that. But, oh, that person, they really get on my nerves. And that's kind of part of how you spot the shadow, is that reaction that you have is something, because people can behave in ways that are not okay and not healthy. That doesn't mean that's part of your shadow. But when you can sit there and go, do you know, I get it. I can do that too. I can be like that too. Then again, it's probably not shadow. When it winds you up, when it gets on your nerves, there's a good chance it's shadow. And it's a big source of lost energy, because this fragmentation in our mind, if I split my head in two, and half of it is my persona, that which I believe I am, and the other half is my shadow, that which I believe I'm not, it still takes just as much energy to keep all that shadow stuff repressed and in my shadow. So it loses me a lot of my energy. So the more that I can acknowledge where I'm in shadow, and the more that I can identify that and draw that out of the shadow and put it back into my persona, I have a much more complete and healthy ego boundary. So I'm able to actually deal with situations much more healthily. I've actually got a lot more energy for myself, because I'm not having to use that energy to repress those aspects of myself. And I get far less bothered and drained by other people, because I'm not constantly trying to make them the reason why I feel the way I do.
That will take, I would imagine, a lot of courage to look at yourself.
Yes, yes. And it's a life practice. So a lot of people have this idea that shadow is only about the stuff that happened in your childhood. But with stages of development that we go through in our life, we've actually got a number of stages that we develop through, and you can look into systems like spiral dynamics to understand how our worldview changes. And the basic version of that is it goes from purely egocentric, that, you know, everything is just about me, to an ethnocentric, everything is about me and mine, however you want to define mine, whether it's just your family, whether it's your town, your football team, your country, you know, that there's all sorts of versions of ethnocentricity, through into world centrism, where we see me and everyone, and then we get into cosmocentrism, which is me and everything. So we move through, and those are very gross stages, very simple stages. They're much more detailed, really. But every time we go through a stage change, that we can repress aspects of our old self, we can repress aspects of the new stage we're moving into, and we can have problems integrating the two. So there's always three possibilities of how we can create these shadow elements throughout our entire life. So I will own right here and now that I'm as likely to cause shadow elements in the next 6 months ahead of my life as I was at any other point in my life. But the difference is that I'm learning to get better at spotting when that happens and how to deal with it and how to change it.
Yeah, well, so Ben, when is this a course that you're teaching? Is it, you know, a weekend, or is it a series of weekends? How is the course structured, and is it online or offline or both? Yeah. Or how's that done?
So prior to this year, it was always done as a weekend course that people would attend in person, and we would go through the theory and a series of exercises where really I'm looking to make people uncomfortable. I want them to feel the stuff that they don't like, and I want them to feel the stuff that they don't touch. You know, there's a big issue in our industry as a whole called spiritual bypassing. You know, there's a lot of virtue signaling. There's a lot of issues that we can pick up with people who have done a little bit of meditation, a little bit of energy work, and they think that they're in some kind of holier than thou place. And it's a big shadow space. And, you know, it's something that really needs working on. So actually kind of picking up on that for people and going into those places where they're really uncomfortable is it's a really powerful piece of work. And it takes a lot to just kind of sit with people and let them express the horror that they've repressed in themselves for all these years. It's really, really strong stuff, but super powerful. Now, earlier this year, I did my first online version of it. We still did it as a weekend, and it went really, really well. Dead impressed with that. I've got that happening again this coming weekend, this end of June. And, so I'm really looking forward to sharing that. And I'll run them on a regular basis online. And I'll be sharing different versions of that with people as well. So I'm also looking to convert that into a self-guided introduction course, so people can do that as an introduction for themselves. And then I've got 2 further levels that look at the shadow in typology, which is the way that we have shadow elements within things like our astrological types, or our Myers-Briggs types, or other psychological typologies, even through our masculine, feminine, introvert, extrovert. You know, we can create a lot of shadow projection within typology. And then the third level that I'm looking to develop is to do with shadow in relationships and dealing with that. As part of the other work that I've been doing during the COVID process is that I'm training as an integral relationship facilitator. So that hopefully in the autumn, when we're allowed to start doing actual in-person work again, I'm looking to run integral relationship groups for singles and couples to help them develop their relationships and improve their lives, and look for much healthier love relationships that have purpose and meaning, rather than just people that are together for the sake of being together.
And I think that happens quite a lot, doesn't it? That people stay together because some people think it's better the devil you know than
Yes.
the devil you don't. And some people can spend many years unhappy in the relationship and scared to take that move. And again, that takes courage to sort of make those changes within yourself. So what other courses have you got coming up?
So the majority of the stuff that I'm teaching at the moment, especially with the whole COVID, I've got the shadow workshops, so they'll be going through. So the next one after the June one is scheduled to be in September, and hopefully by then as well, I'll have the self-guided course up, plus the levels 2 and the 3 ready to teach. So anybody that's done the Embracing Your Shadow workshop with me will automatically be able to come on the 2 and the 3. And also I've got some of the LifeForce Qigong seasonal practice days. So the next one of those is the end of July. And so that's a day of practice with me where we work through aspects that relate into the 5 element processes within Chinese medicine. So at the end of July, we come into the kind of, it's the earth element, but it's the late summer practices. So it's all relating into the kind of the energy of the spleen and really being grounded. So following all this crazy corona stuff, it's going to be a really nice class just to focus on grounding. And then the next one of those will be in October, which will be the autumn class then. So we'll have a seasonal practice then. So those are the focuses really, plus the 3 times weekly LifeForce Qigong practice classes on a Monday, Wednesday and a Friday that I'm teaching through the Centre's online studio.
That's wonderful. And your plans then for the next 6 months, year, have you got, you're studying, as you say, and then you're going to be bringing in those other elements, other plans have you got coming up for the next 6 months to a year?
I mean, really the stuff that I'm focusing on for the personal development is within the integral relationships group facilitator training. I'm also just doing more study myself for kind of relationship dynamics, for mental health work, for the shadow work, more work within Chinese nutrition as well, because it becomes a big element of the epigenetics work that I do. And hopefully
explain that, epigenetics.
Yeah, sure, another one of those ones. So epigenetics is the stuff that influences your genetics. Again, 20 years ago we found out that the concept of genetic determinism is a fallacy. Just because you have a genetic pattern for something or a genetic code, and a great example of that would be the BRCA1 gene that gets a lot of attention for being the precursor for things like breast cancer. Just because you have a genetic marker doesn't mean it's going to do anything. A genetic marker only triggers in response to the environment you're in, and that's influenced by 2 significant things: your perception of the environment, so your mental health has a direct effect on what your DNA does, and also your environment. So this is both your diet plus things like the water and the air and the electromagnetics that you're around, all of which can have an influence on how the cell communication is affected, and therefore what the body produces as a result, whether that's something that's really conducive to good health or not. And so within, it's through kinesiology that I work with the epigenetics mainly, and we assess where people are triggering stuff that they shouldn't be, and how they can trigger more of the stuff that they should be.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. So are you planning on bringing out any books or self-help guides or?
So just the classes at the moment. So really the work is on the courses, and also I'm going to be spending time just supporting Sai as well as we redevelop and adjust things for LifeForce Qigong as well, because there's only 2 of us in the world qualified to teach LifeForce Qigong significantly, and obviously Sai as the founder is my teacher, my mentor within that, but I'm the only other person qualified to teach LifeForce Qigong. There are some very serious students in a few other parts of the world as well that are kind of coming forward with that, but because for Sai and many people who have been kind of keeping up with me over the last couple of months will know that back in March he got stranded in the Brazilian jungle and all his resources ran out, all of his work got cancelled, and he's been doing an in-person retreat based kind of focus for a number of years now, and so he doesn't have any work at the moment, and so we just started yesterday, or solstice, summer solstice, with the first run of his online course, which went really well. We've got a really nice cohort of people from all across the world who are joining in with that. So as far away as I think it's Singapore is the furthest student who we've got joining in with that, which is really, really nice. And so I'm going to be helping him over the next 8 weeks just to manage that, and then helping develop the other aspects of LifeForce Qigong as well, because it's a practice that's so dear to me and so important to my life. So to see it thrive, it's his life's work, and the value of it to the planet, especially at this time. All of these mental dissociations that people have, all of this dissociation out of their bodies that people have. It's the practice that really keeps us well and healthy. And and for me personally, any time those black dog days are looming, and I'm not immune to these things. It's the thing that is my salvation. It's the thing that, without having to overly analyze, which can create further mental dissociation, I can actually get back into my body and inhabit this home that I've been given.
I've seen you do this. I joined in one of your sessions online a few weeks ago, and I really, really did enjoy it. I just felt so peaceful, grounded, but also stretched as well. So I really did enjoy it. It was fantastic. And if people who are watching would like to find out more, where do they go for contact details? What's the best website for you? Phone number, email address? How do people get in contact with you, Ben?
Absolutely, easiest thing to do is go to bencalder.co.uk. So my contact telephone number and a contact form are both on there. There's details about the Qigong. You can access my events diary on there as well, so you can see the stuff coming up. And you can also go to integralhealthshrewsbury.com. And if you click on the events tab there, that will take you through to our online studio. And you can also just book straight into the courses from there. And if you happen to be in the kind of the Harden, Chester area at the moment, I'm teaching a lot of the classes outside, weather permitting, so we can socially distance. People can come and join in, like in person, have a look at a real person, wave at me and say hi, and stay socially distanced, but do the practice one-on-one, which is much, much more powerful. And I'm also offering park sessions for people in Shrewsbury and Chester and here in Harden as well, so that if they want to do a one-to-one with me, do some walk-talk stuff, do some Qigong practice one-to-one, then they can also do that.
So in the parks, which parks are those? Are those the one in Dingle in Shrewsbury, is that?
Yeah, so it'd be the Quarry Park in Shrewsbury, it would be the Grosvenor Park in Chester, and it would be Harden Castle Park here in Harden. Harden's just on the edge of Chester. It's kind of D-side area near Flint, for those of you that don't know it, which is where I'm living during the corona situation. Because as you do, you always look for the strongest place to be whenever you can, and this is definitely the strongest place for me at the moment.
Wow, wonderful. And will you be increasing the number of classes, do you think, your online classes over the coming months?
I think that will just depend on demand and also as well, like I said, looking to support Si with his work. So I think the idea is that we'll share some of that. So certainly between now and at least the middle of August, Si's also going to be teaching 2 classes a week as well that are part of his course, but they're going to be classes that we hope are going to be open to people to come and join in. So you can get a taste of a real Qigong master, come and work with Si, and then you're there working with me, the #1 student, on the other days. So, you know, hopefully within the next couple of days, we're going to be up to offering those 5 days a week. So that's a pretty fair amount. But again, we'll just go on demand for that.
Oh, that's great news. That's fabulous. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what you're doing and with Si as well. So thank you so much, Ben, for spending, you know, the last 40 odd minutes with us. It's been really interesting to hear how you've actually talking about the path that you've walked and you know, from such a young age. And thank you again for being so honest about your childhood and how you got to where you are, and just a fascinating journey. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jane. It's a real pleasure always.
Thank you. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.